I'm chairing our session, so it's not me, you'll be relieved to know. We've got Professor Anne Peirson-Smith and Professor Anil Namdeo chairing this last session. We're going to keep this fairly light, breezy. As I said, I've got some prepared questions for our panel. It's because I've got three microphones. But we're also going to leave time for a little bit of questioning at the end as well for the floor. So if anybody's got a burning question for any of our panelists, then keep that for the end as well. Okay, over to you guys.
Grab my notes in my phone. All the mics are on, by the way. So, here we are at the panel session, and I'd like to welcome back our two keynote speakers, Catherin Salvidge, and also a very warm welcome to our guest panellist, Kate Goldsworthy, Professor of Circular Design and Innovation from Chelsea Art School and University of Arts, London. So, and here's myself, Anne Peirson-Smith, and Professor Anil Namdeo, and we're obviously part of the project team, and we're going to take you through this panel discussion. So, the symposium set out to explore the existing measurement mechanisms and to monitor the industry's environmental impact on air, water, soil, humans, communities across the value and supply chains. We've been addressing challenges, barriers, opportunities for collating, assessing and analysing future developments in these areas, all of which are urgent, as we've also acknowledged, and very pressing given the tangible temporal deadlines that the industry currently faces to reduce emissions, operate more sustainably in sourcing, production and consumption, and to improve environmental performance, aligning with carbon neutral targets. We had a full day. We're all very grateful to have that final bit of caffeine and sugar. But we've had a full day of insightful keynotes, breakout discussions, interaction with our research-based theme displays and the project team, plus informal networking that we've all been doing wonderfully well, all of which has caused us to question existing practices and seek out future solutions rooted in collaborative and cross-disciplinary ways to reduce fashion's environmental impact. So without further ado, let's go through to the questions. Anil and I will ask the questions, we'll team tag it, and we'll ask them, given the pressures on time, we'll throw those questions out to all of the panellists in turn. So I'm going to start off asking, really, how do we make sense of environmental impacts in the context of the fashion industry? It's such a huge undertaking, as we've all acknowledged in our discussion sessions, in terms of understanding it, mapping it. So how can we assess it more accurately and aim towards the sort of standardisation that we've been talking about, but also the effective implementation? So, you're right, if I can go on this side? Okay. Oops, sorry.
Yeah, I think I'll start off at the how the others build on it, but I think for me, and I guess from a textiles 2030 point of view, and what we're doing at RAP, I think we really kind of are really pushing, I guess, for progress over perfection, and we kind of need to have that starting point to be able to, I guess, start to identify areas of high impact and take that collaborative action together and understand where those data gaps are and knowledge gaps are to kind of build on that. And I think, anything that brings the industry together to create kind of common frameworks, kind of data and reporting, is going to help kind of push us in the right direction. I think for us as well, really considering the full life cycle of the product or the products is really how we're going to start to understand the true impact of the industry. And I guess it's all just coming together to agree where to kind of start, and then how we kind of build on that. Yeah, I think we can go to.
Thank you. Okay, Kate,
Yeah, I think I'll take it next. Yeah, I think that sort of building out is really important because in terms of design, quite often we're working at quite a micro level, sort of looking at details on the garment, for example, in terms of impact savings. But actually it's really important to take those very detailed micro learnings and scale them out sort of to, you know, whether it's a commercial retailer in their entire inventory, you know, one really small change can make a massive change across the piece. But also, I think a lot of the things we were talking about on our table earlier was around just how dynamic the data has to be. So we need to be able to draw, you know, a logical picture of how things are, but the actual precise data is changing daily, hourly, and according to, you know, the energy mix of a company or country, or you know, every cotton material isn't the same. It depends where it's produced in the world. So it's kind of how we keep that general understandable framework whilst allowing us then to dig deep into the data as we carry on. Thank you.
And I guess I'd add on to that the transparency element as well, because the impact data has to be comprehensive, it has to be credible, but it really needs to be comparable as well. And that only happens if that data is disclosed, publicly, to allow anyone to analyse that data and to compare it across industries. I know with the Fashion Transparency Index, when we were looking at methodology and we had a consultation committee, we talked to so many different people, and we would often put points into the index where nobody would score, because we knew that needed to be on their radar in the future. And I think we shouldn't underestimate competition between brands as a way of driving both disclosure and greater impact.
Thank you. I'm just going to add a slight question to that, because it's really something that came up in all your discussions, all the table discussions. But, you know, I guess it's who and what should drive the impetus for this change. And it's a big question, and I think we tried to nail that down in some way. What do we feel about that?
I feel like I'm sat in the wrong place. Yeah, who should be driving it? I think we talked around this on our table quite a lot, and I think, you know, there's different angles, but I think, you know, I guess businesses can be driving this, but they can probably only get so far, and they need to be coordinated to ensure that the data kind of is comparable. So I think ultimately we do need kind of some kind of policy and legislation to set that kind of clear direction and make sure we're bringing kind of everybody on the journey, and that we're not kind of leaving people behind. So yeah, but then there's also obviously drives that can come from targets, so kind of setting targets through kind of voluntary initiatives, but yeah, I think policy then needs to kind of really back that up to drive it. And then obviously there's the customer angle as well, and can consumers really drive that change? We've done quite a lot of research at RAP on kind of intentions versus action, and there's such a huge kind of intention-action gap. So it's really probably about, you know, really understanding actually what is going to drive system behaviour change, what actually appeals to them. We were saying, you know, to us, recycled content is, we're like, yes, we want to buy that, it's got recycled content in it, but for some people they see it as kind of, it's dirty or it's not as good quality. So, you know, what actually, I think there's a real piece around actually what does drive citizens to make different choices, and it might not be that this product is more sustainable, it might be a financial incentive or something else. So I think the drivers probably need to come from at RAP we kind of have a bit of a model where it's all about people, partners and policy. So it does need to be driven from all of those angles. But yeah, the system angle is kind of a tough one at this moment in time, kind of understanding what it is that will drive them to make those changes.
Shall I explain that, Stuart? Yeah, on the way here last night, myself and my colleague were in a taxi, and we were being asked, you know, where we were going today and what we were doing. We were talking about sustainable fashion, and the driver was talking about he wanted to buy a special shirt for a special birthday, and he'd sort of really looked at all the different brands, and he'd settled for a Hugo Boss shirt, and it was £100, and it was amazing. And then he looked at the label, and it was 80% recycled cotton, and he said, well, that was it, I am never shopping there again. They're charging me £100 for recycled fibres, isn't that awful? And I think Veronica and I just all of a sudden were like, we have to be so careful we're not just talking in an echo chamber about these things and assuming that all consumers are kind of completely on the same page, because it's so complicated. So I think that question around consumers, policy, industry, like behaviour change can apply to all those areas, not just the consumer. And it's like the chicken and egg. I wouldn't know how to prioritise one over the other, but maybe Carrie.
Yeah, I completely agree with you about speaking to the echo chamber. And when I was at Fashion Revolution, it was something I often used to say, because I know a lot of people are, you know, in London has like-minded friends. My friends are the kind of people where if I'm going on holiday, they say, oh, well, of course, you're only taking one outfit with you and you're going to buy the rest when you get there. But that's the kind of people they are. So I actually have a really good focus group with a completely different mindset. But a couple of weeks ago, we held a policy and research roundtable at Keele University with some different stakeholders. And I think it came across very clearly, certainly on the policy side, that two real areas which will drive policy change are health and economics. And I think those two areas will drive the public's change as well. And I've thought for a long time, and back to one of the projects I didn't speak about, which was founded in the UK's first fair trade organic school uniform company, because back in 2004, I realised what chemicals were in our clothing and had potential health impacts on children. And kind of thinking, what my daughter's wearing that. And I think once people start to have that understanding of the health impacts of some of these chemicals, that will drive consumer behaviour and that will drive policy change as well.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks for the excellent presentations earlier today. And that generated a lot of discussions on our table, and we discussed the environmental measures specifically, and we identified the need to reduce the environmental impact of fashion industry in a broader sense, from different stages. So what we identified, there are some challenges and there are some barriers. I want to ask you, what are the ways, or what are the cross-disciplinary approaches we can identify which can measure the impact, environmental impact of the fashion, and also can we identify some actionable measures?
Do you want me to start this time?
Okay, yes. Pick it up.
I mean, that's a really enormous question, and the way I feel I could answer it from my point of view perhaps is to talk about a project we started quite a while ago now, about 10 years ago, called Mistra Future Fashion, and it was the first time we tried to work in a really multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary group. And the interesting thing about that project was that rather than have the standard sort of work packages that we might all be used to working in, where you've got life cycle work package and a design work package and everyone working in their own silos, we split the whole consortium up into life cycle teams. So the design team had political scientists, material scientists, chemists, as well as designers. And we were all working together trying to understand the impacts of speed on fashion. So at one end, we looked at what was the longest, most durable garment we could produce, and we settled on a 50-year shirt that explored all the different sort of peer-to-peer learnings. And at the other end, we were like, okay, where can we take fast fashion? And so we settled on a paper garment. And then we worked with the material scientists to make a wearable paper. And because we were, in particular with that project, because we were not only developing the material from the fibre up, it was a non-woven, we wanted to design it for compostability and reslushability as paper. So we were working with the material at one end, but at the same time, every time we were applying a different finish to that material, the chemists were looking at how it degraded, how fast it degraded, whether it was slushable. And what we found was, and also then the LCA, the environmental scientists were calculating the impact sort of case study, and we were using both to redesign the material in development. So by the end, we'd come up with a fast material, we called it fast forward, that wear for wear was better than, or at least equal to, the long life one, which actually isn't that much of a stretch of the imagination if you're really focused on light production. And interestingly, one of the processes we'd used to make the paper wearable and slightly water repellent turned out to make it compost at a much faster rate. So again, we wouldn't have known that unless we were collaborating together on product development. And I think that's, if we could bring that kind of approach into industry, it could be really, really impactful.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, it has to be about, collaboration and co-design and co-creation with all of the stakeholders, rather than, a lot of the impetus for changing it's often been put on the suppliers as well, and a lot of data obligations being put on them as well. Yeah, and I think in terms of actionable points, and I've been thinking for the last few days would be, really, because I sort of feel like there's so much misinformation out there, and and I really recognise from my time in Fashion Revolution as well, a lot of the challenges in terms of getting access to accurate data about the fashion industry's impact. And it'd be really great if there was some kind of, like a fashion impact wiki with some of the social and environmental information, where academics, people doing research, people, NGOs coming out with reports, could put that information up there, like Wikipedia pages. Then there could also be discussion between them saying, well, this person says this, says this, so that when you look at that page, you'll try and get information about, is the fashion industry, the second most polluting industry in the world. People are still coming up with that same old chestnut after all this time, quite credible publications. But you can actually sort of see, the different kinds of research that have been done in different places and different people's opinions about whether it might be the 5th or 8th. And I think there's definitely a piece of work to do so that the press and the advocacy organisations that have a huge impact with citizens, with consumers, can actually get some of that accurate, reliable information out. Because if you keep on perpetuating kind of inaccurate information, it undermines, people lose confidence in what everybody's saying. And so we really have to make sure we get better information out there to the general public so they can make more informed choices.
I think if this network does anything, if this sort of a whole network program can bust a few myths, or you used a brilliant term in your talk, fictions, fashion fictions, or sort of, if we can do that together with the knowledge we've got at the beginning, never mind what we might achieve during the course of it, would be great.
Yeah, I don't think I've got loads out. I think, I guess it's kind of also being able to work in that cross-disciplinary way could maybe help us kind of identify some of those unintended consequences, like you were saying, Kate, as we're talking about how can we change the way we design products to be more circular. If there's always trade-offs. If we design a product to be recyclable, it may not be as durable, or if we, and vice versa, or we might use, a certain processing to increase the durability, but it actually then makes that product unrecyclable. So I think having that cross-disciplinary kind of network can really help us identify and kind of work out what are the most impactful actions to take as well.
I have a follow-up question. I think we are very fortunate here that we have scientific scientific community as well as stakeholders or representatives from industry here. If I ask one question, what do you want, for example, from scientific community to help you achieving these actions and scalable actions in short term, mid term, long term? What would you like from the scientific community?
Maybe Carrie.
I think for me it always goes back beyond that, and it's to the funders of the scientific community, and we need that loop of policy influencing funders to just got more general funding for the scientific community to explore those areas that need more funding, such as the unnatural, natural, so we understand the impact of all fibres, and I think it's really important that we have funding to do comparable research, because a lot of research needs to be new and innovative, but actually need to keep on going back to the same sites as Tom was telling me, getting repeat data sets, and that's maybe not something the funders want to keep on funding. So I think for me it's that funding piece to actually make sure we keep funding, maybe repeat research, which might not be as new and innovative, but it's really essential if we're going to understand the impacts.
I mean, that's a really interesting question. I think it's back to that co-design idea again. It's sometimes science or technology developments or anything that's highly technical and focused, we need the depth, but if perhaps we can allow the breadth to come in at the same time, so partnering with perhaps other disciplines that have more an eye on the application, the real world application, then perhaps we would avoid what could be following something where we don't know what the end game is. I think it's really hard sometimes to know in the purest of sort of science whether what you're producing is better. And I guess we can't know that at the beginning, but just having those conversations and allowing the questions to be asked.
Yeah, and I think it's probably, I guess, working quite closely with industry to kind of understand, what are their priorities, where do they see the potential for impact reduction, but maybe don't understand those reductions fully at the moment, and kind of pinpointing the research on those, on those areas that could have kind of got momentum behind them. And I don't know, for instance, I kind of touched on it in my presentation, like we know the processing phase of production has such a huge impact, but there's a huge lack of data, there's a huge lack of transparency, it's very hard to verify. So we know that is an area where industry are very interested in understanding the impact of different processes to help them then make better decisions. I think it's just that connection with kind of scientific research and with kind of the industry as well as the funders.
Thank you. Yes, we've talked today a lot about collaboration and getting people together, stakeholders, multi-stakeholders coming together to effect change, and on which this whole project is premised. But I was just wondering, why is this so important, do you feel? And are we being fully inclusive? Are there any voices that we're missing? And how do we incorporate those? What about the data? We talked about this a lot in terms of how you're operating with Textiles 2030. But how do we ensure that we're collecting the right data, sharing the right data, and how do we get that data to be fully shared and create a pre-competitive space, and the challenges that are evident there? So how do we get over that? And I'm going to start with you, because obviously this is very much part of your challenge of that.
Yeah, I think Carol's mentioned it, like including the supply chain and that being really, really important. And I think that's kind of where we are now, is we know that to be able to report more accurately and to we need that consistent framework, but then we do need kind of the granularity as well. And we really need to be, a lot of pressure is going to be put on supply chains to provide that data. So I think it's really about thinking about how industry, how can brands and retailers actually support their supply chains and collaborate with them to get the right data to help us, enable us to be able to report on the impact of the industry correctly. And it's just kind of linking back to that kind of traceability piece, that transparency piece. But yeah, I think ultimately there's kind of, I think we need to put a real focus on that kind of buyer-supplier relationship, and how we support manufacturers and suppliers to transition to this new world where there's going to be a requirement for a lot of data. And also, I guess, not data, kind of for data's sake, making sure we're collecting the right, the most impactful data to drive the actions that we want to see, rather than collecting all the data that might not actually drive any change at all. So yeah, I think for me it's probably now about looking at that kind of at the supply chain and how we support them in this transition to more traceability and transparency.
Thank you. And carry it with your Fashion Revolution experience and also your global research. What are you feeling about stakeholders, multi-stakeholders getting involvement, inclusivity of all voices in this discourse?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I don't know if I've got much more to add to that. I think we need everybody from the farmers and the suppliers, but we've also got to include those stakeholders that are involved after the life of our clothing. So what about the clothes sorted? I've been talking a lot to Deirdre about hand laundering. So most of our research around laundry is washing machines done in the laboratory, but where more than half of the world, in particularly the global south, are hand laundering. It's one of the questions I asked my Churchill Fellowship is, how do you care for your clothes? How do you think the people who buy your artisanal products you're making, how do you think they're going to care for them? So what is the impact of hand laundering as well? So we need to include all of those voices when we look at impact and all of these different practices. And I think we have to be careful not to make assumptions that just because we care for something, we'll mend our clothes in a certain way, that will also happen, in the afterlife of our clothing and the afterlife after that in whatever country it ends up.
Thank you, Kate.
Yeah, I guess I'm thinking from perhaps a research and industry point of view again, that having representatives from the whole supply chain around the table that buy in equally to what I guess ultimately we want the environment to be the client, almost. We're sort of thinking about the environment as being the primary kind of stakeholder in that cycle, but you have to have buy-in from around the chain. So many times we've worked on projects, I can think of 2 specific projects where the marketing and advertising department turned out to be such an important part of the design team. They weren't traditionally people we would have worked with on a sort of an R&D project, but in particular with the paper project, right at the end, the company we were working with branded it as the throwaway dress, which was so completely sort of in tension with what we were trying to do that we realised we needed to get that side of the business on board much sooner. And I've also heard other stories. The brilliant Holly McQuillan, who does the zero waste garment cutting, she'd worked with a company, got to the point where I think she'd reduced the waste on a garment from 15% to 4%, and a designer who hadn't been involved in the process didn't like the way the shoulder was, changed the shoulder, completely reversed that saving. So everyone's got to be pulling in the same direction from the start.
Okay, thank you. We have your final question.
Final question. I guess we are very good at communicating and engaging with our peers. I think that's the best fact. But how can we communicate environmental, economic, and social impacts of fashion and textile industry to non-experts like consumers? Do you have any views on it?
I think it kind of, links back to what I was saying earlier about, do we understand what citizens value, I guess, and what are their drivers, and yeah, how we use, I guess, the data and the information we have to tell a compelling story as to why they should potentially change habits. And I think, I guess, with also everything now around kind of the green claims code, yeah, I think it's also probably about brands not being scared to talk about what they're doing and to bring their kind of customers on a journey with them, as long as they have kind of, you know, some information to back up where they are going on the journey. Because if we don't start talking about it now, then you know, it's going to take longer to get customers on board. But yeah, I really think it's probably about actually, yeah, understanding what appeals to customers, and perhaps done some research on eco-labelling and what works and what doesn't, and you know, how even you should design an eco-label. And I can't remember all the details of the research, but I can send a link over to yeah, to you guys to share. But yeah, it's just a really interesting, what, you know, recyclability, durability is one of the kind of, and quality is actually one of the highest drivers we find for our research, much higher than sustainability. So actually, yeah, how do you kind of connect, how do you connect that, you know, durability into the sustainability conversation? And yeah, just really understanding this. What's going to drive your customers' behaviour change?
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know really how to add more to that, other than you're trying to convey something so complex in a small space in a way. And I think, you know, what we need is clarity, not simplicity, and that's a really hard, because it's not simple. So for the longest time, people have been asking for the sort of traffic light labelling on clothing, and I just never quite got to the point where I can see that's possible. I'd love it to be, but
Okay. Karen?
Yeah, not much to add really, and I think storytelling is really important. It's something I'm focusing on a lot at the moment, but it has to be backed up by facts and not fluff.
Thank you. Well, this time I'm going to open it now to the floor for a couple of questions. Does anybody have a question for our panellists?
the bottom.
Oh yes, we do have one. We have one there. Maybe
Yeah, I think as we've all discussed, there's a cocktail of problems here that are quite complex, and there's a lot of them. Do you think, or people on the panel think, there are maybe things that are lower hanging fruit that might be the first thing to go after, that you can evidence that there is a way forward, we have to know how to do it?
And I think sometimes it's just the communications. I mean, at the Policy and Research Roundtable we held recently, a member of DEFRA, I mean, natural fibres weren't even on their radar. And so then it's like, arranging a meeting, arranging an online meeting with them, talking to DEFRA, and then hopefully that will, quite quickly then filter into, maybe funding and research. And so sometimes it's just, doing something about it. It's very easy to talk a lot, but it's like once you've worked out that there is a gap, once you've worked out something needs doing, it's just like, go and start making the connections.
Yeah, I agree. I think just some optimism is a really good place to start. And a few years ago, myself and some colleagues and good friends started something called World Circular Textiles Day, and we basically did it because we felt there was lots to be sort of shouting about that was going on in the industry that perhaps was under the radar, or if you just read the media, you'd think it was the most evil industry in the world and no one was even trying, and we just didn't feel like that was the reality. So I think we should celebrate the small wins and share them, and the work that's going on with, well, lots of the people in the room today. Really something to just amplify and multiply.
Yeah, I'm just thinking what to add. I feel like maybe we need to be bolder and go beyond the low hanging fruits. and I think that's kind of, especially, that's kind of how Textiles 2030 came about. You know, circularity probably isn't the low-hanging fruit, but it's going to be the area where we can see the biggest impact reductions. And then, you know, there probably are kind of areas of low-hanging fruit within it potentially. So it might be looking at particular product categories, so maybe the workwear sector, which has a lot of usable products that make to last. Their kind of mono material, is that the low-hanging fruit to kind of test if this kind of design for recyclability, and then the quality of those recycled fibres can go back into production. But yeah, I think it's probably about us coming together to tackle some of the non-low-hanging fruit to really make progress.
Thank you. And I'm just going to finish by asking you to say one word as a call to action to summarise everything that we've been working around today.
I'll go first, not
Yes.
the easy one. Collaborate.
Sorry.
Co-create.
Sorry.
Co-create.
Consistency.
Okay, all the C's. So I'd like to thank all the panellists today. Thank you very much for a very insightful discussion and keeping with it right to the very end. And now I'm going to hand over to Alana to wrap up the day. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
A little mic drop from and just to finish this off. I just wanted to take just a couple of moments to thank you all very much for coming today. I acknowledge that time is hugely precious to you all, and to commit a day is really quite a large commitment. So thank you so much. I also wanted to follow up on what's next. Somebody said to me before, what is happening next? You go to these events and then you hear nothing more. So you will be hearing from us. You're all part of our wider network now. We'll be keeping in touch with our findings, and we'll be sharing our FlexiFund opportunities, any future events that we'll be hosting. This is our largest event, you'll be pleased to know, but we do have smaller dissemination events planned in Newcastle, Loughborough and London as well, so potentially not as far for some of you to travel next time. The highlight of the day is still ongoing. Some people have been drawing really beautiful pictures. Please come and contribute to it. I've got 20 meters to fill, people. So come and have the final stroke of creativity of the day. But just to say again, thank you so much for your time. We will be keeping in touch. And please join us for a glass of wine, beer and orange juice, something cold and refreshing to see you on your way on your journey home. But thank you very much again.